What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 61 of the Book Binge, where this week we are reviewing Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Ruocchio, book 4 of the Sun Eater series. This book, I'll tell you what, right at the beginning, was a trip. It was an absolute trip, and to be clear, I am recording this video less than 24 hours after I finished reading the book, and it almost feels wrong in a way to be doing this. Like I'm trying to rush through my feelings. I had a heck of a time uh, writing my notes for this review earlier today, just trying to figure out what I would say and how I would say it. This video is going to be one of, if not the most spoilery videos that I've released on this channel up to this point. And with that being said, I will go ahead and disclaim here at the beginning of the video. Normally, I do a fully spoiler-free reviews for the books that I read, and if I'm reviewing books in the middle of a series, I will be inclined to spoil, maybe one or two aspects or even plot points of previous books. So if you have not read Empire of Silence, Howling Dark, and Demon in White, don't go forward watching this review because I know that I mentioned a couple aspects of at least Demon in White in this video. At least according to my notes, I will be. So I would recommend you click off if you haven't read through Demon in White. If you have not read Kingdoms of Death, you will be fine. I will be making very clear when I go into a spoiler section, so you will be safe until I go ahead and say skip to a certain part of the video. But yeah, when I do that spoiler section a little bit later in this video, let's just say it's going to be the most spoilery that I think I've gotten for any review up to this point on my channel, because this book requires me to talk about it. Or at least I feel like I have to in order to really process my feelings and my emotions on certain parts of the book. So let's go ahead and start like normal at this point with the good of Kingdoms of Death. Now, if you've read the previous Sun Eater books, you know that the writing and the prose is one of the better aspects of the series. And that's not to say there are any aspects of the series that aren't good, but the prose is definitely notable. It's always been good. But I will say the prose in Kingdoms of Death is, quite frankly, a pretty big step up from previous books in the series, where previous good books, like I mentioned, were already very good in terms of their writing. I noticed with basically every chapter at least a couple passages that were just written so beautifully in this book, even when the meaning of the words or the passages that the words are explaining weren't so beautiful. The words themselves were very beautiful in this book. I think Ruocchio's writing is the best it has ever been in this book, at least of everything that I've read up to this point. In Kingdoms of Death, we also get to see Hadrian hit points of feeling and emotion and growth with a massive question mark that we have not yet seen so far in the series. Frankly, not even close, just as a result of the types of places that this book goes to in the second and the third act. Particularly the third act, but also the second act as well. This isn't terribly unrelated as well to the points of feeling, emotion, and growth, with a massive question mark there again, that I and many other readers also experienced while reading the book. Just the way that you connect to the story and the characters is going to likely cause a lot of feeling and emotion to be evoked from the reader, and Ruocchio does a very good job of it, even if it hurt in a couple of places. The world building and lore, this has been something that I've praised in this series, in every single review, I believe. Just the way that Ruocchio has built his universe and the way that he drops stuff, and even mind-blowing stuff can sometimes just be dropped as if it were nothing. Sometimes he makes big points of stuff that doesn't mean enough, but the way that he writes it makes it feel like it means a lot. Like, the world building and lore of the Sun Eater in general is very good, but in this book particularly, it is unexpectedly intense and mind-blowing all at the same time, and all happens kind of at once. This is where I mentioned I would get a tiny bit spoilery with previous books. Demon in White specifically had a lot of great stuff in the world building and lore section, most specifically where the Quiet is concerned. There's a little bit more of that here in this book too, but the reader's knowledge and understanding, if you can call it understanding, of the Sealson specifically is what really skyrockets in this book, where Act 2 of Demon in White definitely had a lot to do with the Quiet. Acts 2 and 3 of Kingdoms of Death have a lot to do with the Sealson and other stuff related to them. Given the cover of this book just straight up being one of the most important, if not the most important Sealson character in the series up to this point, this isn't totally surprising, but I thought I would mention it because it is very good in this book. At the beginning of Kingdoms of Death as well, the first act, I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier in the notes, but it's fine. The first act of Kingdoms of Death has one of the coolest dystopian sections of a book that I've read, some of the best dystopian imagery that I've read. Quite frankly, even despite the dystopian books that I've read in the past, Kingdoms of Death in the first act hit at some of that stuff and relating it to some pretty specific points in our world's history that just felt really real, but it was so cool to kind of see it in those specific ways. It's not incredibly unique per se, but it has an air of originality in the execution of the society, the way that Ruocchio did that I really quite enjoyed. But even as much as I adore everything about the Sun Eater, generally speaking, this book does have one thing that I will note as something being quote unquote the bad. I will preface this by saying I do not agree with this take at all in the slightest. But I've seen, well, out of all of the reviews that I've seen of Kingdoms of Death, very, very, very few of them have been in any way negative, but practically all of the negative reviews of the book have more or less the same critique of it. That being that it feels like filler, I guess. Like I said, I don't agree with this take at all in the slightest, and without having read several of the reviews that said that, I would never have even, it never would have even crossed my mind. Nobody else that I know who has read the book would say that any of this book feels like filler either. I mean, I guess there's some material in it that I guess could have been condensed slightly, but none of it could have been cut per se. But even just the way it's written, because like I said, this book has incredible prose throughout it, makes pretty much all of it essential. In my opinion, it makes the whole thing essential. But yeah, like I said, nobody I know nor I would say that any of this book feels like filler at all. But given that that's basically the single complaint, at least the single common complaint amongst the few people who don't love Kingdoms of Death, I figured I would mention it, but I wouldn't put too much weight in that, given that, like I said, I don't know anybody who disliked this book, and even if I did, I don't know anybody who would have ever said that filler was the reason that they disliked this book. There's just so much about it that there's so much content in Kingdoms of Death that is very important for Hadrian's growth question mark. Like I said, that yeah, it can't be filler simply because of that reason. But the ugly, now the ugly, this section is going to be a little bit different because normally I just kind of joke about something in this section or don't really mention anything at all. This section's inclusion in my reviews is more me being weird and quirky, I guess, than anything else. But this book's review definitely gets a dedicated ugly section because Kingdoms of Death absolutely killed me, at least for a day. I was a long time recovering in the interim. Um, let's just say I could still function out in public. I could still do my job. I could still do the things of my life that I needed to get done, but my brain and heart were both broken by this book. And if I wasn't actively doing something else, doing something in public or doing my job or whatever it may be, my mind was on this book and I was depressed because of it. I actually, believe it or not, had Ruocchio feeling a tiny bit bad because I'm just so damn dramatic. As just generally speaking as a person, and especially over text, like over Discord and whatnot, I tend to the amount of dramatic tendencies that I tend to, just embody are heightened by my being online. So like I said, Rockio did say that he felt a little bit bad because I'm so dramatic, and he thought that he had wrecked my entire week with certain parts of this book. But seriously, though, there do come points of Kingdoms of Death where everything does take a very sharp turn, and it just kind of keeps getting worse with every page. Not the quality of it, mind you. Nothing about the quality of it gets worse, but there are aspects of it that do get bad and worse in 2.5 nanoseconds. I'll tell you what, like even the end, like just completely unrelated to the section that I'm thinking of, even the end has a deeply emotional and cathartic quality to it. I don't even know if I would say it's a cathartic quality. Like it feels counterintuitively cathartic. Like it shouldn't be, but it is, but also should be, and it isn't. Like it's kind of both at once. It's just this kind of quantum state of being both cathartic and not. And the end of this book hit very hard for that very confusing reason. I'm still reeling from it. I'm still reeling from this entire book. Like I said, I finished it less than 24 hours ago at the time of recording this. Look, I had seen half of the memes that fans have made in commemoration of Kingdoms of Death, but for whatever reason, I was still not ready for what happens in this book. I still somehow did not expect it at all. It hurt. But at this point, I will tell you, huge, massive spoiler warning. Click the timestamp in the description for the recommendation in the description, like I said, for that next section of the video, or navigate to the time in the video that I have on screen right now to skip this section if you have not read the book yet. Final warning, do not continue if you have not read the book yet because I go into huge spoilers. Gone? Good. Okay. So, I normally don't do spoiler talk type of stuff in my videos, but for this one, I just feel like I have to for a couple specific sections because, oh, man. Actually, let me go ahead and find my notes for this because I think I noted one of the chapters wrong in this. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I completely marked that wrong. Chapters 39 to 40, with the gathering of the princes of the Sealson and their subsequent slaughter also. The lore drops of this section with the Sealson and their gods and the Anar, and like everything with these chapters was just some huge mind-blowing stuff that I cannot believe I got. Like I thought that the stuff that happens with the Quiet and Demon in White in the second act, where the Quiet literally showed themselves to Hadrian, I thought that that stuff was like crazy. Like, oh my goodness, this is amazing type stuff. But like this section here was incredible. A lot of that is because the Sealson are just such an interesting species, you know? They're such they're so intriguing. There's something so unknowable about them. The fact that Hadrian got to spend so much time with them and understand just a little bit more Sirianni's its motivation specifically was something that was like amazing. It's awesome to get to see a little bit more expansion in this point of the series for the species because keeping them so utterly inhuman up to this point has worked, but definitely needed a little bit more fleshed out. The weird thing about it is that Rockio definitely definitely does not make the Sealson human in this book because holy cow, there is some gruesome stuff here. But on the same token, there is a slight bit of humanization to them that every chapter I felt like during the second act of this book, I felt like I was reading and just like the Sealson are just so much more intelligent. The Sealson are so much more as a species than my brain is for whatever reason, naturally prone to think of them as. Like, for whatever reason, whenever I'm thinking of the Sealson, I'm thinking of, like a herd of deer, for example, just kind of more or less mindless creatures that don't really fully understand what they're doing, but you really get into them in this or in these few chapters and all the chapters leading up to it with Hadrian's torture as well that are like, No, you really start to understand more about the seals, and that is really freaky, and especially with Sirianni. This was something that I pointed out while reading the chapters. Sirianni, to me, feels almost like the dynamic between Sirianni and Hadrian in certain respects reminds me almost of the Joker and Batman. And this is going to sound like a really weird comparison, but I feel like I have to make it because for whatever reason, the dynamic of Sirianni specifically with Hadrian feels like the dynamic of Joker with Batman if Joker were actively malicious against Batman, and if Joker, or sorry, if Joker had a purpose to it. You know, the famous line from The Dark Knight, the 2008 movie with Heath Ledger. You know, amazing Joker performance. Everybody knows of it, but where Joker says, "I'm like a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught one." Essentially, is what he says. More or less, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Sirianni is the Joker if the Joker knew exactly what he was going to do with the card and had like plans for years in the future what he was going to do with it. Like, it's a very terrifying dynamic that he has with Hadrian, especially since Sirianni fully intends to kill Hadrian, whereas the Joker, uh, basically quits crime when Batman dies in various different versions of the comics and whatnot, because Batman is why Joker does what he does. The dynamic between Sirianni and Hadrian reminds me of that, except that Sirianni has a purpose beyond just being the bane of Hadrian's existence, because that's not the purpose of Sirianni, but there is that dynamic there. Like I said, it's a really weird comparison, and there's a lot about it that doesn't really make sense, technically speaking, but that's just something that I got, and it kind of terrifies me because of it. Moving on to another section of the book, being chapters 41 through 44. I don't even know what to say, man. Like, Rockio is an absolute monster for what he did in these chapters, first of all. But even when it came to relatively minor characters in the series, every death that mounted in the first couple chapters of this section, just they mounted and stacked upon one another and started to hurt me more and more. And I was like, okay, this is going to stop soon. Okay, Rockio, you can stop killing characters that I like. Please stop. Then Alara died, and that was when I nearly cried for the first time. And yeah, first time, you heard that correctly. Um, and that one was like, ugh, I had to fight so hard to not cry for that one. But then Ilex, when she died later, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the time that actually made me cry the first time, especially because of the kind of motif, the kind of link that was shared between her death and the way that Krim goes out as well. Man, that hurt a little bit. And then I was hoping that Rockio was going to be done by that point because I'd already cried once. That was enough. I didn't need it anymore. And then Rockio finished that chapter killing Palino, dying after that. And that was when I broke down. So I cried a second time after he died, but I really broke down that time. Like, it wasn't just crying for, a few seconds and then trying to gather myself together and wiping the tears away and pretending like I'm fine. Palino was like, I finished the chapter. Like, I didn't even finish the chapter. Like, I read it. I had to put the book down like a page before the end of the chapter for a few minutes just to recover, and then I finished the chapter, and then I continued to break down after that. I had to take a couple chapters away, or a couple chapters, that's not what I want to say. I had to take a couple hours away from the book entirely before I could even read the next chapter after that, being 44, to finally get off of the planet, because Palino's death just hit me so hard, and thinking about it's like, can't believe Rockio did this. I hate that you did this so much. And then, of course, that last chapter of the section. Of course, Rockio had to leave Corvo there too. Of course he did, because he's an absolute monster and all he did was want to make his readers hurt. I don't actually believe that he was trying to choose violence on his readers, but it certainly felt like it. These chapters, there's just so much. And truth be told, this last one, like, I saw that coming. Hadrian and Volca leaving alone. I saw that coming. I knew that that was going to be what happened. I knew that Ruocchio was going to do that, but I was just like in denial. I was just in denial for so long. I refused to accept that that's what he was going to do. That, just hoping that maybe he wouldn't do it. Then he did it. But when it comes right down to it, I obviously still recommend Kingdoms of Death to you as the reader, whether you just came to this section after skipping the spoilers or you watched through the spoilers, depending. If you haven't read Kingdoms of Death yet, definitely do read it because it's still Sun Eater quality, and Sun Eater is amazing, but to the point that it is probably my all-time favorite series at the moment, despite it not being finished yet, and even despite my not being finished with all of the books that are out yet. It's just a great series. And by the way, I suppose I might as well mention, if you have not watched last week's video where I did a quick compile of all of the recent news and happenings related to the Sun Eater, go ahead and check out last week's video. You'll get a lot more information on some of the information regarding that, including a little bit of exclusive info related to Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3, by the way, which is pretty nice to be able to announce, sort of technically exclusively. But to be honest, if you asked me to rank these four books at this point, besides Empire of Silence being at the very bottom of that list, I genuinely don't have a clue where the rest would go. Like, that's just straight up the truth. I know I said in the Demon in White review that the events of the last chapter is what kicked Demon in White just above Howling Dark for me. In the time since then, I would say that Howling Dark has barely regained that crown, but Howling Dark and Demon in White are so close to each other in terms of quality that it's hard to really. It's basically impossible to justify putting one above the other or putting one below the other. It's really hard. After reading Kingdoms of Death, I would say that it's even harder now because there's three of those books that I'm trying to rank rather than just two of them. Um, the quality of Kingdoms of Death is up there with Howling Dark and Demon in White handily, even though it is a lot tougher to get through because of various reasons, including, all the stuff that I mentioned in the spoiler section, as well as some pretty torturous type of material in the second act as well. Can be a bit to get through, but I mean, if you were to ask me my ranking gun to my head, I would probably say Howling Dark on top, then Kingdoms of Death, then Demon in White, but I will say that those three are so close, it's really impossible to rank. You could rank those three in any order, and I wouldn't disagree with you. But yeah, like I said a little bit earlier, I did compile all of the recent Sun Eater news over the last couple months, put it into a State of the Sun Eater video that I released last week, which was reviewed and approved by Christopher Ruocchio himself to ensure that none of that info was incorrect. So go ahead and check that out if you are interested. And if you are as invested in the series as I am at this point, go check out that video anyway, just to make sure that you haven't missed anything given the spread of announcements and clarifications and whatnot between different platforms and stuff. And follow all of Christopher's channels directly so that you can get the information from him firsthand as soon as he is able to release information on pretty much anything. So, this review was a lot longer than I thought it would be. That spoiler section went on a bit longer than I thought it would be. I just kept on talking. So my apologies for that. But thank you guys for watching this video. As always, I appreciate all the support. I'll be back, I believe, on Thursday with something. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's actually the final part of the 2022 reading tier list at this point. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what's coming out on Thursday. I have absolutely no idea what's coming out next week. I really don't. I have an idea of what video might be coming out, but depending on my reading schedule, it might be something completely different that I have not even determined yet. So, again, thank you guys for watching. Especially if you got to this point in the video, I appreciate you sticking through uh, you know, my all of my pauses and contemplations because this book was a hard one to get through and arguably a harder one to review because there's just so much of my thoughts scattered because I read it so recently. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll be back on Thursday, most likely with the final tier list video for my reading of 2022. And then whatever the heck comes out after that, I'm not even entirely sure at this point.